My name is Violet, and I'm 52 years old. As I sit here in my quiet kitchen stirring honey into my morning tea, I never imagined I'd be telling you this story. 3 weeks ago, I buried my husband Robert after 30 beautiful years together. What happened next with my own son and his wife still takes my breath away. The cruelty, the greed, the shocking betrayal that followed Robert's death nearly broke me, but sometimes life has a way of surprising us when we least expect it. Before I share what really happened when that lawyer opened my husband's will, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Please hit that like button if you're ready for a story that will remind you why we should never judge a situation before we know the whole truth. Subscribe because you won't believe how this unfolds, and let's dive into the most devastating and ultimately triumphant week of my entire life. Robert and I met when I was 22, fresh out of college, with dreams of becoming a teacher. He was this brilliant, ambitious young man with calloused hands and eyes full of fire, working 18-hour days in his parents' garage, convinced he could change the world through technology. I believed in him completely. When he proposed 2 years later, he promised we'd build something beautiful together. And we did, just not in the way I originally imagined. I gave up my teaching dreams when Marcus was born. Robert's software company was growing rapidly, demanding every ounce of his attention. Someone needed to create a stable home to raise our son with values and love while Robert traveled the country securing contracts and investors. I threw myself into motherhood and supporting Robert's vision. While he coded and pitched and built his empire, I managed everything else. The household finances, Marcus's school events, family gatherings, even entertaining Robert's business associates when deals needed that personal touch. Robert's company, Dataflow Solutions, started in that cramped garage, but eventually employed over 200 people. What began as a simple inventory management system evolved into comprehensive business software used by companies across America. By the time Marcus turned 20, Robert's net worth had reached $42 million. We moved from our modest starter home into a stunning colonial mansion with 6 bedrooms, a 3-car garage, and grounds that required professional landscaping. But success came with unexpected challenges. Marcus grew up privileged, attending private schools where his classmates' families owned yachts and vacation homes in Europe. Despite my efforts to instill humility and gratitude, he developed a sense of entitlement that worried me. When he married Jessica 5 years ago, my concerns deepened. She was beautiful and charming, but I noticed how her eyes lit up when discussing expensive purchases and luxury vacations. She had opinions about everything we owned, often suggesting improvements that would cost tens of thousands of dollars. Robert's cancer diagnosis 18 months ago changed everything. The aggressive treatment required frequent hospital stays and left him weak but determined to fight. I became his full-time caregiver, managing his medications, driving him to appointments, and holding his hand through the worst moments. During those long nights in hospital chairs, Robert would sometimes squeeze my hand and whisper, "You've given me everything, Vi. I'm going to make sure you're taken care of forever." We never discussed the details of his will. Robert handled all the legal and financial matters just as he always had. I trusted him completely. When his business partner David visited near the end, I overheard fragments of their conversation through the bedroom door. Words like foundation, legacy, and making things right drifted down the hallway, but Robert never shared specifics with me. The funeral was beautiful, exactly what Robert would have wanted. Simple, dignified, focused on celebrating his life rather than mourning his death. Marcus delivered a touching eulogy about his father's work ethic and vision. Jessica wore an appropriate black dress and dabbed her eyes at the right moments. But I noticed something troubling. During the reception afterward, while I was still receiving condolences from Robert's colleagues and friends, Marcus and Jessica huddled in corners with serious expressions, having hushed conversations that stopped whenever I approached. The morning after we laid Robert to rest, I woke up in our king-sized bed, feeling utterly lost. For the first time in 30 years, I was alone in the house that had been the center of our family life. Every room held memories from the kitchen where Robert would grab coffee before dawn meetings to his home office where he'd work late into the night, always with music playing softly in the background. I was sitting at the breakfast table staring at Robert's empty chair when Marcus arrived with Jessica. They knocked, rather than using their key, which struck me as odd. When I opened the door, their formal demeanor surprised me. Instead of the grieving son who had wept in my arms just yesterday, Marcus stood stiffly in the doorway wearing his most expensive suit. Jessica remained a step behind him, her expression unreadable. "Mom, we need to talk." Marcus said, his tone businesslike rather than warm. They followed me to the living room, but neither accepted my offer of coffee or breakfast. Marcus sat on the edge of the sofa while Jessica perched beside him, her designer handbag clutched tightly in her lap. "This house is enormous," Marcus began, gesturing around the spacious room with its cathedral ceilings and wall of windows overlooking the gardens. "Way too big for one person. Have you thought about what you might want to do now that—" He trailed off, unable or unwilling to say, "now that Dad's dead." My confusion must have shown on my face because Jessica jumped in with a sugar-sweet smile. "What Marcus means is that maintaining a property this size is such a huge responsibility. The utilities alone must cost a fortune, not to mention the landscaping and general upkeep. Might be nice for you to find somewhere more manageable, more suitable for this stage of your life." Their words felt strange, almost rehearsed. I'd lived in this house for 15 years. Robert and I had chosen every piece of furniture together, planned the garden layout, hosted countless family gatherings in these rooms. The idea of leaving had never occurred to me. "I hadn't really thought about moving," I admitted. "This is my home. All my memories with your father are here." Marcus exchanged a glance with Jessica that made my stomach tighten. "Of course, and we understand that," he said carefully. "But there are practical considerations now. Financial realities that Dad probably shielded you from because he didn't want you to worry about business matters." "What kind of financial realities?" I asked, my voice sharper than intended. "Well, estate taxes for one thing," Jessica said, as if she were an expert on such matters. "And the ongoing expenses of running a business. There are so many complicated legal and financial issues that need to be sorted out." Marcus nodded gravely. "Dad always handled everything because he knew how overwhelming these things can be for people who aren't familiar with business operations. The lawyers will take care of the details, but in the meantime, it might be wise to start thinking about simplifying your situation." I felt like I was listening to strangers, rather than my son and daughter-in-law. Where was the warmth, the shared grief, the family support I'd expected in my time of loss? Instead, they spoke to me like I was an elderly relative who couldn't be trusted with important decisions. "Marcus," I said slowly, "are you saying I can't afford to live in my own home?" His answer came too quickly, as if prepared in advance. "I'm saying we should wait for the lawyers to explain everything. In the meantime, it wouldn't hurt to start looking at some nice condominiums or maybe one of those senior living communities with activities and maintenance included." The words hit me like a physical blow. Senior living communities. I was 52 years old, healthy, and perfectly capable of managing my own life. But before I could respond, Marcus was checking his watch and standing up. "We have appointments to keep," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Why don't you take some time to think about what we've discussed? We'll talk again in a few days when things are clearer." They left me sitting alone in my living room, surrounded by wedding photos and family portraits, wondering if I'd misunderstood something fundamental about my life with Robert. 3 days later, Marcus called to invite me to dinner at Chez Laurent, the most expensive restaurant in town. "A family dinner," he said, "to discuss Dad's affairs properly." His choice of venue surprised me. Chez Laurent was where we celebrated major milestones, not where we held serious family discussions. But I was desperate to understand what was happening, so I agreed. I arrived to find Marcus and Jessica already seated at a prime table, both dressed as if they were attending a gala rather than a family dinner. Jessica's jewelry sparkled under the restaurant's crystal chandeliers, and Marcus wore a watch I didn't recognize that probably cost more than most people's cars. They'd ordered champagne, which felt wildly inappropriate given that we'd buried Robert less than a week earlier. "Mom, you look lovely," Marcus said, standing to kiss my cheek, but his embrace felt performative, and Jessica's smile never reached her eyes. As soon as I sat down, a server appeared with the champagne, pouring me a glass before I could object. "What are we celebrating?" I asked, genuinely confused. Marcus and Jessica exchanged another one of their meaningful looks. "Dad's life," Marcus said, "his incredible success, and the legacy he's left behind." Over appetizers that I barely touched, they made small talk about the weather and Jessica's yoga classes. But I could sense anticipation building, like actors waiting for their cue to begin the real performance. Finally, as our main courses arrived, Marcus cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Mom, I've been meeting with Dad's attorneys and accountants, getting a full picture of the estate and the business operations. He paused to sip his champagne. I want you to know that you're going to be taken care of. Dad made sure of that. Taken care of, I repeated. There's going to be a monthly allowance, Jessica interjected, her tone bright and helpful. Enough to cover your expenses once you've moved somewhere more appropriate. The word allowance hit me like ice water. An allowance from my own husband's estate. Marcus held up his hand as if calming a child. Let me explain the situation. Dad built something incredible with data flow solutions, but running a company like that requires someone with business experience and vision. He always worried about what would happen if something happened to him, whether you'd be able to handle the complexity of it all. My fork clattered against my plate. Handle the complexity, Marcus? I helped build that company. I managed our household finances for 30 years. I supported your father through every challenge and triumph. Of course you did, Jessica said in a patronizing tone that made my teeth clench. As his wife. But running a multi-million-dollar corporation is different from managing household expenses. Marcus nodded seriously. Dad knew you'd want a comfortable retirement without the stress of business decisions. That's why he structured things the way he did. I'll be taking over data flow solutions and the main estate, the house, the investments, the business assets. But you'll receive a very generous monthly payment that will allow you to live comfortably. The restaurant around us seemed to fade away as the full meaning of his words sank in. You're inheriting everything. The business holdings, yes, Marcus said. It's what makes sense. What Dad wanted. Jessica leaned forward with fake sympathy. We know this must be overwhelming, but try to see it as a blessing. No more worrying about business meetings or financial decisions. You can focus on enjoying your golden years. Golden years. I was 52 years old, not 82, and the condescending way she spoke to me as if I were incapable of understanding my own life filled me with a rage I'd never experienced before. I don't understand, I said, my voice shaking. Robert never mentioned any of this to me. Because he didn't want to burden you, Marcus replied. He knew how much you loved him and how hard it would be to think about practical matters while he was sick. Other diners were beginning to glance our way as my voice rose slightly. Burden me. Planning for our future together was a burden. Jessica placed her hand over mine in a gesture that felt more restraining than comforting. Violet, honey, I think you're getting upset over nothing. A monthly allowance that will cover all your needs, no responsibilities, no stress. Most women your age would be grateful for such security. That word, grateful, sent fire through my veins. Grateful to be reduced to a dependent child in my own family. Grateful to have my life's work dismissed as irrelevant. How much? I asked through clenched teeth. How much what? Marcus looked confused. How much is this generous monthly allowance you're so kindly providing me? Marcus named a figure that would cover basic living expenses in a modest apartment, nothing more. After 30 years of marriage to a man worth $42 million, they were offering me scraps. The conversation continued for another excruciating hour with Marcus and Jessica outlining their vision for my simplified future while they took control of everything Robert and I had built together. By the time we left the restaurant, I felt like a stranger in my own life, cast aside and dismissed by the son I'd raised and sacrificed for. I spent the next morning wandering through my house like a ghost, touching familiar objects and wondering how much longer they'd be mine. Every family photo on the mantel, every piece of furniture Robert and I had chosen together, every room where we'd made memories seemed to whisper goodbye. I was standing in Robert's home office, running my fingers along the spines of his favorite books when I heard voices in the front yard. Through the window, I watched in horror as Marcus and Jessica stood on my lawn with a man carrying a measuring tape and clipboard. They were gesturing toward different areas of the house, clearly planning changes to what they now considered their property. When they noticed me watching, Marcus had the grace to look slightly embarrassed, but Jessica waved cheerfully, as if this were perfectly normal behavior. I met them at the front door before they could use their key. What exactly is going on out there? Just getting some preliminary measurements, Marcus said, not quite meeting my eyes. For the renovations we'll be doing once the estate transfer is complete. Renovations. My voice cracked on the word. Jessica pushed past me into the foyer, already acting like the lady of the house. Oh, Violet, you're going to love what we have planned. We're thinking of opening up this whole wall to create better flow between the living room and dining room. And upstairs, we'll combine two of the smaller bedrooms into a proper master suite. She continued describing their plans while I stood frozen in shock. They weren't just taking my home. They were planning to erase every trace of the life Robert and I had shared here. The timeline works out perfectly, Marcus added. You'll have about 2 weeks to sort through your personal belongings and find a new place. That should be plenty of time. 2 weeks, 30 years of marriage, and they were giving me 2 weeks to disappear from my own life. Marcus, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, this is my home. He looked genuinely puzzled by my distress. It was your home, but circumstances change, Mom. You have to be realistic about your situation now. Jessica returned from her tour of the first floor with a legal pad covered in notes. We'll need to do something about all these family photos, too. They're just not really our style. She gestured dismissively at our wedding portrait hanging in the hallway. Maybe you could take them to your new place? Wherever that ends up being. The casual cruelty in her voice, the way she referred to precious memories as clutter to be disposed of, finally broke something inside me. These are not your decisions to make, I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. Marcus stepped between us, his expression hardening. Actually, Mom, they are. I tried to be gentle about this, but maybe it's time for some hard truths. Dad left the estate to me because he trusted me to make the right decisions. You've never had to handle serious money or business matters. This is what's best for everyone. Best for everyone? I laughed bitterly. Or just best for you and Jessica. Don't be dramatic. Jessica snapped, her sweet facade finally slipping. We're offering you a comfortable retirement with no responsibilities. Most people would kill for that kind of security. I don't want security, I shot back. I want my life, my home, my husband's legacy that we built together. Marcus's face flushed red with anger. Your husband's legacy? Mom, you were a housewife. You didn't build anything. Dad built a company, made the money, earned the success. You were along for the ride. The words hit me like physical blows. Along for the ride. As if 30 years of love, support, sacrifice, and partnership meant nothing. As if raising his child and managing our life while he focused on business was worthless. Don't even dream of touching Dad's $42 million. Marcus continued, his voice rising. That money represents decades of his hard work and vision. You wouldn't know what to do with that kind of wealth if you had it. Jessica smirked openly now, clearly enjoying my devastation. Reality check, Violet. You're not the grieving widow inheriting the kingdom. You're the dependent who needs to be grateful for whatever crumbs you're thrown. Neighbors had begun to notice the raised voices. Mrs. Patterson from next door was openly staring from her garden, and I could see curtains twitching in windows across the street. My personal humiliation was becoming a public spectacle. I felt my legs give out and sank onto the bottom step of the staircase where Robert used to sit when he came home late, pulling off his shoes and telling me about his day. The enormity of my situation crashed over me in waves. I was alone, dismissed, and apparently worth nothing more than a monthly allowance in the eyes of my own son. That's when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Williams & Associates, Robert's longtime law firm. With shaking hands, I answered. Mrs. Patterson, this is Attorney Williams. I'm calling to confirm your attendance at the formal reading of your husband's will tomorrow at 10 a.m. It's important that all beneficiaries be present. Marcus went pale. What formal reading? I thought we'd already handled everything. But the lawyer was still speaking to me. Mrs. Patterson, your presence is specifically requested. There are provisions in the will that require your personal acknowledgement. The phone call changed everything. Marcus immediately became agitated, pacing the foyer and demanding to know why a formal will reading was necessary when the estate transfer was supposedly already underway. Jessica's smirk vanished, replaced by a worried frown that told me she was beginning to question their assumptions. There must be some mistake, Marcus insisted, grabbing the phone from my hand. This is Marcus Patterson. My father's estate has already been reviewed by your office. I couldn't hear Attorney Williams' response, but I watched my son's face cycle through confusion, anxiety, and something that looked suspiciously like panic. When he hung up, his confident demeanor had completely evaporated. What did he say? Jessica demanded. He said all beneficiaries must be present for the complete reading, Marcus replied slowly. That some portions of the will haven't been disclosed yet. That evening, after they'd left, I found myself unable to sleep. I wandered into Robert's home office and began looking through his personal papers, something I hadn't done since his death. Most documents were business related and beyond my understanding, but tucked away in the bottom drawer of his desk, I found a folder labeled Personal Thoughts. Inside were handwritten notes in Robert's familiar scrawl dated from various points during his illness. As I read them, my heart began to race. Page after page detailed his concerns about Marcus's entitled attitude and Jessica's obvious focus on material wealth. He wrote about watching them during family dinners, noting their assumptions about inheritance and their casual dismissal of my contributions to our family's success. One passage dated just 2 months before his death made me gasp aloud. Violet has given up everything for our family. Her career, her dreams, her independence. She's been my partner in every sense, but M and J see her as just a housewife who got lucky. They have no idea what she's truly worth or how much she's sacrificed. I need to make this right. The next morning, Robert's business partner David called. We'd known each other for 20 years, and his voice was warm with genuine sympathy. Violet, I've been worried about you. How are you holding up? I'm confused, I admitted, about Robert's will and Marcus's plans for the estate. There was a long pause. Marcus told you about Robert's will? Something in his tone made me sit up straighter. He said he's inheriting the business and the house, that I'll receive a monthly allowance. Violet, David said carefully. I was present when Robert finalized his estate planning. What Marcus described doesn't sound like the document I witnessed. My hands began to shake. What do you mean? I think you should hear Robert's actual wishes directly from Attorney Williams today. And Violet, I'd like to drive you to that appointment if you don't mind. I think you're going to need a friend there. I spent the morning getting ready with more care than I'd taken since Robert's funeral. I chose the navy blue dress he'd always said brought out my eyes, the pearl earrings he'd given me for our 20th anniversary, and the wedding ring that had never left my finger. If this was to be the final chapter of our love story, I wanted to look worthy of the life we'd built together. David arrived early, his familiar smile providing the first comfort I'd felt in days. As we drove to the lawyer's office, he shared memories of Robert's pride in our marriage and his frequent mentions of my strength and intelligence. He never made a major business decision without talking it through with you first. David reminded me. He called you his secret weapon. The law firm of Williams and Associates occupied an entire floor of the city's most prestigious office building. The reception area was elegant and intimidating with leather chairs and oil paintings that spoke of old money and established power. When we arrived, Marcus and Jessica were already there, sitting stiffly in matching black outfits that made them look like they were attending another funeral. The tension was immediately apparent. Marcus avoided my eyes while Jessica stared at her manicured nails with obvious anxiety. Whatever confidence they displayed yesterday had been replaced by nervous energy that filled the waiting room. Other people began arriving. Robert's brother Tom and sister Sarah, whom I hadn't seen since the funeral, several business associates I recognized from company events. Each new arrival seemed to increase Marcus and Jessica's discomfort. At exactly 10 a.m., Attorney Williams emerged from the conference room. He was a distinguished man in his 70s who'd handled Robert's legal affairs for over 2 decades. His expression was grave but kind as he invited us all inside. The conference room was impressive, with a massive mahogany table surrounded by leather chairs and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Williams took his place at the head of the table with several thick folders and official documents spread before him. Marcus and Jessica sat directly across from me, their faces pale, but determined. Thank you all for being here, Williams began, his voice carrying the authority of decades in estate law. We're gathered for the complete reading of Robert Patterson's last will and testament executed 3 months before his death and properly witnessed according to state law. He lifted the first document with ceremony. Before we begin with the distribution of assets, Robert requested that I read a personal message he wrote specifically for this moment. The room fell completely silent. Williams cleared his throat and began to read in Robert's words, and I felt my late husband's presence fill the space around us. Attorney Williams' voice carried clearly through the silent conference room as he read Robert's personal message. If you're hearing this, it means I'm gone, and my family is gathered to learn about my final wishes. First, to my beloved wife Violet, the woman who gave up her own dreams so I could chase mine, who raised our son, while I built a business, who supported every risk and celebrated every success. You are the foundation upon which everything good in my life was built. I felt tears streaming down my face as Williams continued reading Robert's words. To those who might question Violet's contributions to our success, let me be clear, every dollar we earned, every milestone we reached, every achievement that bears my name was made possible by her sacrifice, intelligence, and unwavering support. She is not just my widow, she is my partner, in every sense of the word. Across the table, Marcus had gone completely white. Jessica's hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles showed through her skin. But Williams wasn't finished. I have watched with growing concern as certain family members have developed attitudes of entitlement and shown disrespect toward the woman I love most in this world. This will is my final opportunity to correct those misconceptions and ensure that my true values are honored. The lawyer set down Robert's letter and picked up the official will document. Now for the distribution of assets from the estate of Robert James Patterson valued at approximately $42 million. My heart pounded so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. Marcus leaned forward, his confidence returning as he prepared to hear his inheritance confirmed. To my daughter-in-law, Jessica Patterson. Williams read, I leave the sum of $0.00. Her lack of respect for my wife and her obvious focus on material wealth rather than family values make her unworthy of any part of our family's legacy. Jessica's gasp echoed through the room. She turned to Marcus with wide, shocked eyes, but he was staring at the lawyer in disbelief. Williams continued without pause. To my son, Marcus Patterson, I leave 10% of my business holdings in Data Flow Solutions to be held in trust for a period of 5 years. During this time, he must demonstrate respect for his mother, contribute meaningfully to the family business, and show that he understands the values of hard work and humility that built our success. If he fails to meet these conditions, his inheritance will revert to my wife. Marcus jumped to his feet. 10%? That can't be right. I was supposed to inherit the business. Please sit down, Williams said firmly. I'm not finished. With shaking hands, Marcus sank back into his chair. Jessica looked like she might faint. To my beloved wife, Violet Patterson, the lawyer continued, I leave the remaining 90% of all business holdings, including complete control of Data Flow Solutions. I leave our family home and all real estate properties. I leave all investment accounts, retirement funds, and liquid assets. I leave the responsibility and privilege of continuing the legacy we built together. The words hung in the air like thunderclaps. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what I was hearing. 90%, the house, control of the company, everything. Williams wasn't done. Robert also included specific instructions about the conditions for Marcus's inheritance. He turned to my son, whose face had gone from white to gray. Your father was very clear. You must publicly acknowledge and apologize for your treatment of your mother following his death. You must demonstrate respect for her position as head of the family business, and you must prove over the next 5 years that you understand the value of the contributions she made to your father's success. This is impossible, Jessica whispered, but her voice carried clearly in the silent room. He can't just give everything to her. Williams fixed her with a stern look. Mrs. Patterson, your father-in-law was of sound mind and had every right to distribute his assets as he saw fit. This will has been reviewed by multiple attorneys and is completely valid and legally binding. He reached for another document. Robert also left a private letter for his wife to be read aloud in the presence of the family. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the tissue someone had passed me. Williams opened the sealed envelope and began to read Robert's final words to me. My darling Violet, by now you know the truth about what you meant to me and what you deserve. I spent weeks watching Marcus and Jessica discuss their plans for my money as if you were invisible. I saw how they dismissed your intelligence, your contributions, your worth. I couldn't let that stand. The lawyer paused, looking at me with kindness before continuing. You gave me 30 years of love, support, and partnership. You raised our son, managed our home, and provided the stability that allowed me to build something lasting. Every success I achieved was made possible by your strength. The money, the business, the properties, they're not my legacy. You are my legacy. Through my tears, I could see Marcus staring at the table, his face a mixture of shock and shame. Jessica had gone completely silent, her earlier smugness replaced by dawning horror as she realized the implications of Robert's decisions. Williams set down the letter and reached for a thick folder. There are additional provisions. Mrs. Patterson, your husband, established a charitable foundation in your name with an initial funding of $5 million. He wanted you to have the resources to make a difference in causes you care about. He also left detailed instructions for the business transition, making it clear that while you now own Dataflow Solutions, you should lean on the existing management team and board of directors as you learn about operations. The reality was overwhelming. Not only had Robert left me financially secure, he'd given me purpose and the tools to create positive change. But more than that, he'd validated every sacrifice I'd made, every dream I'd set aside, every moment of doubt I'd had about my worth. Finally, Williams concluded, Robert included a provision that if Marcus chooses to contest this will or treat his mother with continued disrespect, his 10% inheritance will be immediately forfeited and added to the charitable foundation. Marcus finally found his voice. Is there any way to contest the will? Williams interrupted. You certainly have that right. However, I should mention that Robert anticipated this possibility. He had extensive documentation of his mental competency, multiple witnesses to his signing and video testimony explaining his reasoning. Any legal challenge would be expensive and ultimately unsuccessful. The room fell silent except for Jessica's quiet sobbing. The woman who had mocked me yesterday, who had called me a housewife along for the ride, was now crying over the loss of wealth that had never belonged to her in the first place. The drive home with David felt surreal, like floating through a dream where everything familiar had suddenly changed. I kept staring at the legal documents in my lap, seeing my name next to numbers that still didn't feel real. Violet Patterson, majority owner of Dataflow Solutions. Violet Patterson, beneficiary of a $42 million estate. After a lifetime of being dependent on my husband's income, I was now one of the wealthiest women in the city. But the money wasn't what mattered most. What broke my heart and healed it simultaneously was knowing that Robert had seen everything I'd thought was invisible. Every sacrifice, every compromise, every moment I'd wondered if I'd lost myself in being a wife and mother. He had witnessed it all and understood its value. David helped me process the immediate practicalities. You'll need to meet with the business managers next week, he said gently. Robert built an excellent team, and they're excited to work with you. You don't have to become a CEO overnight, but they'll need your input on major decisions. The house felt different when I walked through the front door. These were still the same rooms where Marcus and Jessica had dismissed me just yesterday, but now I saw them through new eyes. This wasn't just the home I might lose. It was the foundation of a legacy I was now responsible for protecting and building upon. Over the following days, the contrast in behavior was stark and telling. Marcus called repeatedly, his voice a mixture of panic and what I hoped was genuine remorse. Mom, I need to explain what happened. I was so overwhelmed by Dad's death and the lawyers I talked to. They must have misunderstood something. But Jessica's reaction revealed everything I needed to know about her character. Within 48 hours of the will reading, she had filed for separation from Marcus. When she came to collect her belongings from their apartment, she made no effort to hide her bitterness. I can't believe you're just accepting this, she said to Marcus while I happened to be present. Your mother manipulated a dying man into giving her everything. There has to be something we can do. Jessica, stop, Marcus said quietly. Dad was completely lucid when he made these decisions. Maybe we need to think about why he felt this way. Because she's been playing the perfect wife act for 30 years, Jessica snapped. Well, congratulations, Violet. You got what you wanted. I hope you enjoy spending money you never earned. Those were the last words she ever spoke to me. The woman who had been so confident about inheriting wealth that didn't belong to her disappeared from our lives as quickly as she'd tried to claim ownership of them. Marcus, however, began the difficult process of genuine reflection. It started with small things, calling to check on me instead of demanding updates about business decisions, asking about my day, rather than assuming I had nothing important to share, actually listening when I spoke, instead of waiting for his turn to talk. The real breakthrough came 3 weeks after the will reading. He arrived at the house on a Sunday morning, not dressed in his usual expensive suits, but in jeans and a simple shirt, carrying a bouquet of the yellow roses Robert used to bring me every Friday. Mom, he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway like a child seeking permission to enter, I owe you an apology that's about 30 years overdue. We sat in the living room where he'd dismissed me so cruelly just weeks before, but this time his tone was entirely different. I've been thinking about everything Dad wrote in that letter, about how I treated you after his death, but also about how I've treated you my whole adult life. I took you for granted. I assumed Dad was the only one who mattered because he made the money, and I disrespected everything you contributed to our family. His voice broke slightly. I called you a housewife like it was an insult, but you raised me Mom. You were there for every school play, every soccer game, every night I was sick or scared or needed help with homework. You supported Dad's career even when it meant giving up your own dreams. You created a home where we could all thrive. The apology continued for over an hour, with Marcus acknowledging specific instances of disrespect and entitlement that I hadn't even realized he'd noticed. But more importantly, he began asking questions about my own experiences and feelings, many for the first time in his adult life. What was it like giving up teaching? He asked. Did you ever resent Dad's success when it came at the cost of your career? I found myself sharing feelings I'd buried for decades. The occasional loneliness when Robert traveled for weeks at a time. The moments of doubt when I wondered if I was smart enough to have opinions about business decisions. The pride I'd felt watching Data Flow Solutions grow, knowing that my support had helped make it possible but never receiving credit for my contributions. Marcus listened with an attention he'd never shown before. I want to earn back your respect, he said finally. And I want to earn Dad's inheritance honestly by proving I understand what it really means to be part of this family. That conversation marked the beginning of a slow but genuine transformation in our relationship. Marcus began working at Data Flow Solutions in an entry-level position, determined to learn the business from the ground up rather than assuming he deserved a leadership role. He attended family therapy sessions with me to address decades of communication problems. Most importantly, he began treating me as an intelligent adult whose opinions and experiences had value. I used my new resources thoughtfully. The $5 million charitable foundation became a way to support causes Robert and I had cared about: education programs for underprivileged children, technology training for women re-entering the workforce, and cancer research. Every grant we approved felt like honoring both Robert's memory and my own values. Managing Data Flow Solutions proved less intimidating than I had expected. The leadership team Robert had built was exceptional, and they welcomed my input while patiently teaching me about aspects of the business I'd never understood. I discovered that many of the skills I'd developed as a homemaker — budgeting, project management, relationship building — translated directly to business operations. But the most profound change was internal. For 30 years, I'd defined myself primarily through my relationships with others: Robert's wife, Marcus's mother, the woman behind the successful man. Now, for the first time, I was discovering who Violet Patterson was as an individual. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. As months passed, I found myself thinking less about the cruelty Marcus and Jessica had shown me and more about the gift Robert had given us all. By structuring his will as he did, he'd forced our family to confront difficult truths about respect, value, and character. Marcus's inheritance wasn't just money. It was the opportunity to become the man his father had hoped he could be. 6 months after that devastating dinner at Chez Laurent, Marcus and I had lunch at the same restaurant. This time we were celebrating his promotion to junior analyst at Data Flow Solutions, a position he'd earned through hard work and dedication rather than family connections. As we talked about his projects and goals, I saw glimpses of the thoughtful, hardworking young man I'd always hoped he could become. I understand now why Dad structured things the way he did, Marcus said over dessert. It wasn't about punishing me. It was about teaching me that respect and responsibility have to be earned, not inherited. Robert's will had accomplished something I'd never thought possible. It had given our family a second chance to build relationships based on genuine love and respect rather than assumptions and entitlement. The money, the house, the business, they were all meaningful. But the real inheritance Robert left us was the opportunity to discover who we truly were when stripped of pretense and forced to confront our own character. In death, he'd given us all a chance to become our best selves. As I sat in that elegant restaurant watching my son speak passionately about projects he was working on and goals he'd set for himself, I felt Robert's presence as strongly as if he were sitting beside us. This was what he'd wanted: a family built on mutual respect, shared values, and genuine love rather than material expectations. The will reading had been just the beginning. The real inheritance was the journey of growth and healing that followed. So, here's my question for all of you watching today. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where people underestimated your worth or dismissed your contributions? How did you find the strength to stand up for yourself? Share your stories in the comments below, because I believe we all have moments when we need to remember our own value. If this story reminded you that everyone deserves respect regardless of their role in life, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about family forgiveness and finding your strength when it matters most. And don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that their contributions matter even when others can't see them. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that sometimes the people who love us most see our worth even when we can't see it ourselves. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.